It was a breezy afternoon in downtown Philadelphia, the kind of day when the city's heartbeat is felt in every echo of footsteps and every aroma of freshly brewed coffee. In a quaint corner cafe, amidst the clink of cups and the murmur of casual conversations, Barron Trump sat alone near a large window. Draped in a simple hoodie and jeans, he appeared as any other patron seeking a quiet escape from a world that often judged him by his last name. For Barron, this cafe was a sanctuary, a brief respite from the constant glare of public life. Lost in a thick book and his own thoughts, Barron hardly noticed the hum of daily activity. That is, until an abrupt, forceful voice shattered the calm. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" bellowed a man, his words slicing through the ambient noise. The outburst drew every eye in the cafe, and soon all attention zeroed in on the lone figure at the window. The man, appearing to be in his late 40s with a weathered face and a look of raw indignation, had stormed in unexpectedly. His clothes, though neat, bore the marks of hard labor and tougher times, a stark contrast to Barron's understated attire. As the stranger pointed an accusing finger in Barron's direction, the cafe's warm atmosphere froze into a tense silence. Patrons exchanged startled glances, unsure of how to react. The stranger's voice grew louder, his tone laced with bitterness. "You've got everything handed to you on a silver platter," he shouted, his anger unmistakable. "Do you have any idea what it's like to struggle?" His words resonated with a mix of personal pain and societal resentment, echoing off the cafe's walls. Barron, initially startled by the eruption, slowly closed his book and set it aside. He looked up calmly, his eyes meeting the man's fierce glare. "Sir," he said quietly, his tone steady and devoid of any defensiveness, "I'm not here to boast or to stand above anyone. Perhaps you'd care to share what's truly bothering you." The stranger, taken aback by Barron's unexpected composure, hesitated for a brief moment. His posture stiffened, then faltered as he scoffed, "Share my story. What could you possibly understand? You live in a world where everything is given to you without effort." A murmur ran through the cafe as tension rippled among the onlookers. The barista's hand hovered near the phone, uncertain whether to intervene. Yet, rather than rising to match the man's fury, Barron did something entirely unforeseen. He gestured towards the empty chair opposite him. "Please have a seat," he invited softly. "I'd really like to understand your perspective." The stranger's eyes narrowed, his anger battling with a flicker of curiosity. With a grunt, he dragged the chair noisily across the floor and, after a moment's hesitation, sat down heavily. His arms remained crossed defensively, and his gaze bore the marks of years of hardship. "You think I owe you my story?" he challenged, his voice lowering but still edged with sarcasm. "What could someone like you possibly grasp about real struggle?" Barron's reply was measured and sincere. "I know that every person carries burdens invisible to others," he said gently. "I may not have lived your exact experiences, but I understand what it feels like to be judged before anyone truly knows you." His words, delivered with quiet intensity, caused a ripple of silence among the cafe's patrons. Slowly, the stranger's posture softened, though his eyes still burned with unresolved pain. "You think listening to me will somehow make you feel better about your life?" he snapped. Yet, even as his voice wavered, the raw vulnerability beneath emerged. "I had a job, a stable life, until the factory shut down. In one day, everything vanished. Promises were made and broken, leaving me with nothing but anger and a sense of betrayal." As the stranger began to recount his tale, his voice grew heavy with emotion. He spoke of long, grueling days after the closure, of the bitter taste of disappointment when hopes for relocation turned to dust. He described the moment his wife left, unable to bear the relentless pressure and despair, leaving him with a crushing loneliness he'd never known before. Each word was a confession, a cathartic release of years spent bottling up the pain of being judged and misunderstood. Barron listened intently, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "I can't imagine the weight you've carried," he said softly when the man paused. his voice cracking under the strain of memory. I've been judged too, simply because of who I am supposed to be. It's easy for people to assume they know your story just by looking at you. The stranger's anger began to ebb as he absorbed Barron's words. I always thought that someone like you wouldn't understand the real world, he muttered bitterly. Every time I see you, well-dressed, reading calmly, it just makes my struggles feel even more insignificant. His eyes scanned the room as if noticing for the first time the faces of other patrons, each lost in their own reflections of life's hardships. But Barron continued, undeterred by the man's caustic remarks. I may not have experienced every hardship you have, but I've known what it means to be invisible, to be reduced to a stereotype. We're both more than what people assume. His words, though simple, carried the weight of genuine empathy and understanding. As the conversation deepened, the atmosphere in the cafe transformed. The earlier tension gave way to a reflective stillness, and even the barista resumed her work with a soft, knowing smile. Other patrons leaned in, eager to catch every word of this unexpected exchange, a dialogue that transcended bitterness and bridged two very different lives. The stranger's defenses continued to crumble as he revealed more of his inner turmoil. I came here angry, convinced that the world owed me something, he confessed, his voice now quieter, laden with regret. I thought I could lash out at someone who seemed to have it all without effort, but maybe I've been carrying that anger too long. Maybe it's not about you at all. Barron's response was gentle yet firm. Anger can be a heavy burden. Sometimes it's not about proving something to others. It's about understanding our own pain. I'm not here to change your mind or erase your struggles. I'm here to listen because I believe every story deserves to be heard. The stranger's eyes softened as he considered Barron's words. After a long, heavy pause, he slowly extended his hand across the table. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, laden with sincerity. I judged you before I even knew you. I let my anger blind me. In that quiet moment, as their hands met in a tentative handshake, the hostility that had once charged the room dissipated into a shared understanding. As the stranger withdrew his hand, a profound silence fell over the cafe, one that was not oppressive but filled with the promise of change. The tension that had gripped the room gave way to a renewed energy, as if every patron was now a part of a small, powerful act of collective healing. A woman seated nearby, her eyes reflecting the warmth of compassion, approached Barron. Young man, she said softly, what you did back there was remarkable. You didn't just listen, you showed genuine empathy. That's something we all need today. Barron offered her a humble smile, replying, Thank you, ma'am. Sometimes all it takes is a little kindness to remind us that we're not so different. As the afternoon light began to wane, the cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Conversations resumed with a gentler tone, strangers exchanged smiles and nods of understanding, and even the background clatter of cups and utensils carried a softer cadence. The encounter had sparked a ripple effect, reminding everyone present that beneath every harsh exterior lies a story worthy of compassion. Barron, once again returning to his quiet corner by the window, picked up his book and sipped his cooling tea. Yet the memory of that conversation lingered, a silent testament to the power of empathy and the courage to listen. He walked out of the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that even the smallest acts of understanding could change someone's day or even their life. And as he strolled down the busy Philadelphia street, Barron reflected, sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with words of confrontation, but with those of compassion and openness. In that cafe, two very different lives had intersected, and in doing so had reshaped the perspectives of everyone who witnessed it. If this story moved you, remember to practice kindness and always be ready to listen, because every person carries a story that might just change the world.